Welcome to you both. You have 5 minutes in which to address the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillors, for inviting Better Bankside to give evidence today. I'm Danielle Cohen, this is my colleague Nicole Gordon. We're from Better Bankside, the Business Improvement District in the north of the borough. We cover the area between Borough High Street and Blackfriars Road, and our members are the 650 plus businesses that fall within that area. Better Bankside does not yet have any hard data or empirical evidence on what the impact of our member businesses will be of Brexit. Our impressions are anecdotal, and the impact of that leaving the EU will have on business is likely to be complex, which will make it challenging to isolate those effects from other factors. However, there is still much uncertainty about the terms upon which the UK will leave the EU. And we do hear that businesses are considering and trying to factor in the impact of Brexit. Our sense is that in this climate of uncertainty, some of them may be hesitant to make decisions until they have more clarity. We're not hearing yet, therefore, a clear consensus from businesses as to what the exact impact is likely to be.
What we have heard anecdotally, however, is that staff recruitment has been directly impacted, particularly in the hospitality sector. Hospitality businesses, including hotels, restaurants and venues, indicate a large drop in the number of applications they're receiving for vacant positions. Several attribute this to the effects of Brexit. Specifically, they speculate that uncertainty about immigration arrangements post-Brexit and the fall in the value of the pound following the referendum are deterring EU nationals from applying for jobs in the UK. In Bankside, 109 of our 650 member businesses, that's 17% of our membership, are in the hospitality sector, and this is the second largest sector within our bid area. Businesses in other sectors are also reporting a significant tightening in the labour market. And furthermore, we've heard some concerns about continued trade with Europe, both exporting to EU countries and price increases in imported goods. Last November, Better Bankside convened our business members for a seminar to discuss the impact of Brexit. Businesses in attendance felt that ongoing advice and guidance on Brexit is needed, especially as further information emerges.
So in summary, we're keen to work closely with the Council and with our fellow business improvement districts in Southwark to continue to monitor the impact of Brexit on businesses, and also to share with the Council whatever data they would find useful in informing their response as the situation develops.
Is that it? Good. Well done. Well in time. Could I then ask you to pose a question to the relevant Cabinet member? Thank you.
We don't have a...
That's fair enough then. That saves us more time. Okay, well, I will then invite members to ask a question. I've got Jonathan Situ first, David Noakes second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank Better Bankside for coming along today and for all of your work in both working with businesses and in light of the discussions you've had post the vote last year. In terms of, you quite rightly highlighted, in terms of your work, you also have part of your work is Employ SE1, which you work together with other bids in a local area. And I wanted to ask about that in terms of any anecdotal evidence you've had talking to businesses as to whether it would delay investment in terms of jobs, because I think everyone in the room will agree with me that it's important that any deal we do get ensures that we protect employment and we ensure that we're protecting the local economy as well. So I'd like to ask you that. Thank you.
Well, at this point, what we're hearing through Employ SE1, when we're talking to employers, what we're hearing is really about this dramatic drop in the number of applications they've had. And so at this point, we're hearing from businesses that this is the tightest labour market that they've experienced for a number of years, if not over a decade. So that's really what we're hearing most strongly at the moment. I don't think that businesses are yet ready to say what that pattern their investment will follow post-Brexit.
Councillor Noakes, do you have a question?
I do, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Better Bankside, for that considered deputation. I just wondered, do you have any suggestions or specific requests at this stage about how the Council could best protect and support businesses from a potential hard Brexit?
I don't think that we have a specific request at this point, other than what my colleague said about the information and guidance being important as it becomes available, and just being able to keep our businesses informed of what those impacts might be. So, yeah.
Councillor Dennis, do you have a question to ask?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for coming in. You mentioned the hospitality sector, and I wondered if you had had any further conversations and could give any information on other sectors, in particular perhaps construction. Obviously we've got a lot of building planning going on in the borough. And then the other area that I was thinking of, there's been newspaper reports around nurses and hospitals. Guys falls in within Team London Bridge's patch. And I didn't know whether or not, again, you'd had conversations with Team London Bridge about those people who are working within the NHS.
We constructors, to address the two sectors that you mentioned specifically, we don't have any construction sector members, so we haven't spoken to that sector specifically. The majority of our members, we have a lot in hospitality, but we also have a lot in the professional services and those kind of related industries. And they are also saying that they're experiencing tightening of the labour market. I think they are less ready to directly attribute that to Brexit, but it seems to us to be following a pattern in that there might be a knock-on effect from the Brexit impact.
Thank you. And probably finally, Councillor Adele Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for your deputation. You mentioned the hospitality are already struggling. Obviously, a huge amount of development happening in the north of the borough, and all the planning applications come in, and they all want A3 uses, cafes, restaurants and bars. Indeed, in the licensing department, we've got regularly new applications for new bars and licences. Do you think that we might, as a council, have to rethink about our strategy going forward for those types of businesses in that part of the world, if the impact of Brexit is already having an effect on that sector?
Well, what we're hearing from the hospitality sector is that this is not the difficulties they have with recruitment at the moment are not localised in this area. It's a national industry issue, and as such, many of those members are working not just with Better Bankside and the other bids through Employer C1, but also through their industry at a national level to try and address the skills shortage in that area.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I'd like to ask one of the officers to escort you out, and then once again, you are welcome to stay. We will now consider the themed motion on what does Brexit mean for Southwark. In that case, I will invite Councillor Peter John, the leader of the Council. You have 7 minutes in which to present the theme debate and the motion of the theme. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm moving this motion at the start of this debate with a heavy heart, because to my mind there has never been a more damaging, self-inflicted wound that this nation has imposed upon its economy and body politic than the decision just over a year ago to vote for Brexit. Some people argue that Brexit opens up a world of opportunities. I see no opportunities, just consequences. Consequences which we in local government and our residents living in Southwark just have to get on and deal with. Denied a seat at the negotiating table, local government, and to a large extent London, has to sit by whilst failing ministers fumble with our futures. Despite the claims of some, we all know, and we've heard this evening, that economic uncertainty has risen since the Brexit vote. National government has been paralysed in its work. Government, as usual, doesn't happen. But over the next 21 months, apparently, this otherwise visionless and wholly unresponsive government will come up with a plan which sees us smoothly leave the EU and takes us to the broad sunlit uplands of a free trade Britannia, sailing magnificently towards regaining an economic power last seen at the end of the 19th century. Now, the evidence, Mr. Mayor, to support this optimistic view isn't promising. David Davis went in to begin negotiations with Michel Barnier a month ago, determined that those negotiations would be a twin-track approach. No way would the UK's financial contribution be the first item of business. At the end of that first day, David Davis emerged. It had been determined that the UK's financial contribution on departure would be the first item of business. We waited a year for the government's position on the status of EU nationals, a position which should have been guaranteed by David Cameron in the hours immediately after the referendum result. Mrs May grandly announced her offer to the European Union. It was rightly and roundly rejected. Mr. Mayor, the truth is that this hopeless government does not have a plan for exiting the EU. It has no plan for how our businesses, our economy, our residents will be supported. The hollow promises of the Leave campaign have been exposed as just that, hollow promises. Now, in Southwark, we knew those promises were hollow. That's why 73% of those who voted in the referendum voted to remain in the EU. The 31,000 EU nationals who live in our borough are residents of Southwark and London. It would be patronising, at the very least, to say they are welcome in our borough, because they are our borough and are an essential part of our community. Now, Mr. Mayor, regretting the referendum result is not the same as rejecting the referendum result. And we accept the democratic will of the people expressed last year. Some people in this chamber would argue with justified passion for a second referendum. Personally, I don't think the time is right for that, if for no other reason that I'm not convinced that the use of referendums is compatible with representative democracy. One foolish and misguided referendum called for purely party political reasons is not corrected by a second one. But what we must all do is commit to the values which underpin our membership of the EU, and our motion is an attempt to restate those values. Those commitments to employment, apprenticeships and employment rights, to education and to strengthening educational and other links with our partner towns in France and Germany. Our commitment to protecting our most vulnerable residents from any adverse economic consequences, and our commitment to environmental protection and making our borough a greener and healthier place to live. Now, Mr. Mayor, many of the improvements to our living and working conditions have their origins in the EU. As an administration and as a borough, I hope that we will never let go of our commitment to continue learning from best practice in the EU in these areas and ensuring that we do not see an erosion of the protections which are there for all of us. It's why the Labour Party nationally has clear commitments to ensure that any deal which government strikes with the EU continues to retain many of those protections and opportunities. But some of the improvements, the London Living Wage, the Ethical Care Charter, improved housing conditions, are down to our local initiatives and our local values. Mr. Mayor, it will be a foolish person who predicts what might happen over the next 21 months. But I am confident that the essential nature of our borough will not change. It will remain open. It will remain tolerant. It will remain Southwark. And I hope that all members can support this motion and the values that I hope we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John. The lead opposition spokesperson will now have an opportunity to reply to the Cabinet Member's statement. and speak to Amendment A. Councillor Al Samurai, you have 5 minutes in which to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for congratulating me earlier. I also wanted to add my congratulations this evening to Jeremy Corbyn. I wanted to congratulate Jeremy Corbyn on defying the expectations of many of us here, from all parties, and stopping a landslide Tory majority. It's important, Mr. Mayor, to give credit where credit's due, and the Corbyn effect did persuade an unprecedented number of people to vote against a tired and increasingly hardline government, which is hell-bent on cutting the UK off entirely from our nearest neighbours and friends. I think we can be heartened by the number of young people who became politically engaged during the general election, and by the passion they bring to issues of our time, especially on Brexit. And it's important, I think, Mr. Mayor, that we listen to these young people, to what they are telling us about how they see the future of this borough and this country. Not a small, isolated Little England island off the coast of Europe, forever looking backwards to some dubiously rose-tinted past, but a vibrant, diverse and open society, connected with our continental neighbours, part of the European conversation and not closed off from it. As the amendment which I'm moving makes clear, 73% of Southwark residents who voted in the Brexit referendum voted to remain. They voted to move forward with Europe and not turn their backs on it. It is therefore the duty of every one of us here, as elected representatives of the people of Southwark, to fight for their best interests as the national government negotiates the terms of our future relationship with the EU. It is also our duty to speak up on behalf of the 31,000 EU nationals who live in our borough. We are, in fact, their only elected representatives here in the UK, and if we do not speak up for them, who else will? They deserve our every support in ensuring that their rights are not stripped from them in a hard Brexit. That's why Southwark Liberal Democrats do agree with the motion that the Council has a key role to play in working with local MPs to lobby for the rights of our constituencies. But we've introduced our amendment because the motion as it stands does not go far enough in seeking to secure those rights. It is not simply enough to just lobby the government on these matters. As we've seen in recent days, the instability of Theresa May's position means that opposition parties have a unique opportunity to influence the outcome of Brexit negotiations. And the Council must therefore urge Southwark MPs, all the MPs, to lobby their own leader to ensure that the National Labour opposition does everything it can to stand up for the people of Southwark. Neither is it simply enough to clarify the right of EU citizens to remain. We must call for their existing rights to be fully protected. As the leader of the Council said last year, we must work hard to ensure that Southwark does not lose the many benefits that the EU brings. The motion notes that we're already seeing rising household costs and uncertainty, as we've heard from the Better Bank side this evening as well. That's why our amendment calls for transitional arrangements which maintain economic stability and calls for the UK to remain part of the single market and the customs union, keeping prices affordable and the economy moving. I'm really concerned that Labour couldn't just vote for that amendment this evening, that they're seeking to amend an amendment, which seems a great shame to me. Brexit is without a doubt the defining political issue of our generation. Its after effects will be felt for years to come, and they reverberate through all the other key issues, our relationships and responsibilities to each other, our environment and the wider world. It therefore cannot be acceptable that a government without a majority in Parliament can unilaterally decide the future of our country, that they can decide to withdraw from the EU without any deal, gambling with people's lives and futures for a point of principle. This is not a time for tribalism. The stakes are just too high. And as I look around this room, I know that most of you share my view that the EU is too precious to be sacrificed to appease those who want to turn the clock back. We need to send a strong message to national politicians and to local people that Southwark is proud to be a modern, outward-looking borough, and that we as a council will never stop advocating for the rights of our citizens, no matter what nationality they hold. I urge you to support the amendment to the themed motion.
Thank you, Councillor Al-Samurai. Does anyone wish to move to suspend Council Assembly Procedure Rules? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would again like to propose that we suspend the programme motion.
Good show.
So that we can introduce an amendment to an amendment.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor.
Just mention that that's been circulated in the chamber as we speak.
Say that again.
That's been circulated in the chamber.
Yes, it's been seconded in the chamber, of course, yes. So then I will now move to the vote on suspending the Council Assembly Procedure Rules and to accept the late Amendment E to Amendment A on the themed motion. You all understand that? Even Councillor Dolezal did. There we go. Right. I know. Fair enough. So, Councillor Mark Williams will move Amendment E. Thank you, Councillor Mark Williams. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. They haven't voted.
We haven't. You're absolutely right. And I don't know why Mark Williams was getting to his feet. So, what do I know? Hey. So there we are. Those in favour of accepting the late Amendment E? Good. That looks to be unanimous. Am I right? Oh, no. No.
42.
Anyone against? One or two, yeah. All right. Any abstentions? Good. It's carried. Smashing. Now, Councillor Mark Williams, you can get to your feet. Thank you. You've got, I don't know how long you've got. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I think I speak for everyone in this chamber when I say we are looking forward to your mayoral year and the slick operation of local government. So I welcome you, Mr. Mayor, to your new role. Welcome. I propose Amendment E to Amendment A. But before I do that, I'd just like to say a few words about the recent referendum result and reflect on what Councillor John and Councillor Al-Samurai just said. Many of us in this room campaigned hard to remain in the European Union. I myself ran the main Labour campaign room, committee room down in Peckham on election day and had a fantastic turnout from members and members of the public that just came in to help out on referendum day, but unfortunately we lost despite the fantastic turnout and result in our borough. I think some of the key things to reflect on, particularly on what Councillor Samurai said, was the rights of EU citizens. It's absolutely disgraceful that the rights of 31,000 of our residents, of our borough, as Councillor John rightly referred to them as, are being used as a bargaining chip by Theresa May with the European Union, and that's absolutely disgraceful and shameful. And after denying them a vote in the referendum that affects their lives, using them in this way is absolutely disgraceful. The other thing I'd just like to reflect on is Donald Trump and the absolutely chilling message that came from him at this week's G20 or last week's G20 summit, when he said that he'd promised Theresa May a rapid, quick, free trade agreement with America. The only way that's going to happen is if we completely roll over as a country to all of America's demands, open up our NHS to privatisation from American healthcare firms, and prepare ourselves to be eating chlorinated chicken for the next 20 years, which isn't a premise I think any of us would welcome. I'd also finally like to welcome Councillor Al-Samurai's comments supporting the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who led us to a much, much better result than any of us expected, and we are now in touching distance of removing this pernicious right-wing Tory government and getting a Labour government to deliver our fantastic manifesto that will deliver for the many and not the few. Which brings me neatly on to our amendment. At paragraph 9, delete set out proposals to remain within the customs union and single market and replace with set out proposals to retain the benefits of the custom union and single market. And with that minor change of wording, hopefully we can get consensus across this chamber on all those important points that we agree on. Make sure Southwark's voice is heard loud and clear with one voice, united to serve, as our borough motto states. So I move the amendment to the amendment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Hold it, I haven't said yet. Oh no, invite Councillor Fiona Colley to second Amendment E. Carry on.
They've already started my time, Mr Mayor. I was eager to get on because I know there are so many members wanting to speak tonight. Mr Mayor, like so many members of this chamber, I worked extremely hard for the Remain campaign last year. I was also running a campaign centre on referendum day and was absolutely devastated by the result. I went home from the count, had a bit of a sleep, and then to add insult to injury, my Leave voting in-laws had taken down my Vote Remain posters. It was too soon. I retrieved them from the recycling and put them back up. Mr Mayor, I still believe that Brexit is a terrible mistake that will be deeply damaging to our country, to our economy, and to the opportunities our children will enjoy in the future. But nonetheless, I am not a Ramona. And the referendum was lost, and the reality is we must now make the best of it. But I do welcome almost everything in the Liberal Democrat amendment. We do need to make sure that there is a deal at the end of these negotiations, that jobs and employment rights are protected, that cross-European working on security and scientific and medical research continues, and that we get the best possible trade deal. I am glad that Liberal Democrats have not put forward tonight the suggestion of a second referendum, and I think that we are able, with this small amendment, to reach a cross-party agreement tonight, and know that is something that Councillor Al-Samurai is normally very keen to achieve. I think it is simply, and I do welcome also her point, what is well made about the additional influence that the Labour Party now holds with the situation in Parliament. But it's not realistic to suggest that membership of the single market can continue. It would bring with it a requirement for continued freedom of movement and acceptance of EU rules without a say on those rules. So for that reason, I'm seconding this amendment to make this minor change to Amendment A, to set out proposals to retain the benefits of the customs unit and the single market. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. I have a number of members who wish to speak on the motion or Amendment A and E. I will start with Councillor Colwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. While it may be the case that the Liberal Democrats only called for a debate on this topic in the hope of scoring some cheap political points, I for one welcome this discussion. And I welcome that the discussion is taking place here in Southwark, which, as we all know, is the best borough, in the best city, in the best country, in the greatest political and economic union the world has ever known, in which warring countries became reconciled and forged lasting partnerships based on common values, in which communist and fascist dictatorships were replaced with democracies, in which the welfare state was extended to hundreds of millions of people, and in which the fundamental rights we hold so dear on maternity leave, on collective bargaining, on environmental standards, on equal pay for men and women, became universal. To bring things slightly closer to home, many of the achievements this administration cherishes are put at risk by Brexit. The hardship funds we make available to Southwark's poorest residents are less impactful when eaten away by the inflation that Brexit has caused. Thousands of Southwark's EU citizens, whose friendship we value so dearly, are being driven out of our borough by the inability of politicians to safeguard their right to remain. And the young people in our secondary schools, who for years have been encouraged to shoot for the stars, regardless of their background, have suddenly had their horizons lowered. I'll be voting for the motion and the amendment presented to Council Assembly. I am in favour of retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union, and I'm in favour of retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union because I am in favour, even now, especially now, of Britain remaining a member of the EU. Colleagues, there is nothing left-wing about Brexit. There is nothing progressive about Brexit. And as a left-wing, progressive party, if we do not at least keep open the option of opposing the utter catastrophe that is about to befall us, we will be betraying our party, our values, and the people we claim to stand up for. As public opinion shifts, I for one will continue to seek to influence my party's stance on Brexit. It is vital, colleagues, that we don't end up on the wrong side of the argument on the single biggest issue of our time.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to invite Sunil Chopra. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering what Brexit is. Brexit is just a confusion. It has created a lot of uncertainty. Businesses are already suffering. Prices are going up. Value of the pound has gone so low, people cannot afford to import. So it's a very, very bad deal. Even you might have heard the Dominic Cumming, the special advisor to Michael Gove, even he also mentioned he is not sure what is going to happen and how Brexit is going to work. I'm a bit confused about some of the manufacturing issues, like some cars parts are made in UK, some are made in Brussels, some are made in Belgium. How are we going to sort this issue out? Even the government is not sure. One of the aircraft wing is made in UK, another part is made in another part of the Europe. So these are certain very technical and important issues which government is scratching their head, even they don't know how to sort this issue out. There's another issue about there are 14 British overseas territories which they used to get some funding from Europe through British government. So what's going to happen to them? There are so many issues which nobody knows. So what's going to happen to those ones? Another issue is about the freedom of movement. Some people may be working from Northern Ireland to Southern Ireland in the morning, coming back in the evening. So how are they going to work? Do they have to have a visa? Do they have to have a work permit to come in the morning, go back in the evening? So nobody is talking about these sort of issues. Government is not clear about this. And there's also so uncertain in the market that many companies are already planning to move out from London, and especially from Southwark. We've got so many big companies here. You must have heard JP Morgan a couple of days back said, oh, we might move our offices from UK. So it is very, very bad for the local economies. How are we going to protect people working in our borough? How are we going to protect the businesses? If these businesses move out, we're going to lose revenue as well. We're not going to get business rates. People are going to get unemployed. There's a lot of knock-on effects. So we have to think that we must work together to make Southwark a place where people can feel happy to work, live and invest, so that we can protect those jobs. Those are working here. Especially, we just heard about it, the construction industry, hospitality industry and NHS, we certainly need more people from Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chopper. I'd like to invite Councillor Whitehead to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the wit you've added to the occasion today. I'd like to start by saying that in the in the face of populism, I think it's the role of politicians, whether Southwark members or members of Parliament, to be considered in their public positions and avoid the urge to resort to short-termism. It is the job of those who are elected to understand the complexities and nuances of the various challenges that we face. Yet in the case of Brexit, a matter of such significant complexity, it is only the Liberal Democrats of the National Party in England who have consistently advocated the benefits of a continued role as a member of the EU. Last June's vote for Brexit was one that deeply troubled me for many reasons, one of which was my firm belief in the fundamental and growing importance of cooperation between nation-states. This is not just because of trade or immigration, but also because so many of the challenges of our age can only be solved through a global outlook and multilateral solutions. This argument is not straightforward, and it's not one that many people understand. But polls suggest that almost half of people who voted for Brexit did so because of the issue of sovereignty and wanting UK decisions to be made in the UK. Yet the suggestion of almost complete national sovereignty is appropriate for a 21st century world where the internet dominates our society and tech giants such as Google operate with impunity across borders, where countries are forced to compete with each other for who can offer the lowest tax rates to global corporations, where climate change threatens our very existence. The field of cancer treatment is just one example of where international institutions play a vital role. Euratom is an EU treaty which deals with the supply and cross-border transfer of radioactive isotopes that are used for the treatment of cancer sufferers. Under current proposals, the UK will leave this treaty and with it threaten the lives of many cancer patients. This is in itself deeply troubling. But Euratom is just the tip of the iceberg. The rowing back of cooperation with our European neighbours will of course have a profound impact on the residents of Southwark and the wider UK. Unfortunately, tonight's motion and the confused national response that the main opposition of Jeremy Corbyn and his shadow cabinet to Brexit are wholly inadequate and fail to sufficiently recognise the profound and deeply damaging effects that our drive to leave the EU is likely to have on the future of the United Kingdom. As Councillor Samurai rightly says, we need a clear and consistent national cross-party opposition on this matter, so that the Tory government cannot go ahead and do what it wishes and threaten international cooperation that we hold so dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Richard Livingston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My greatest concern arising from Brexit is the status and rights of the 31,000 EU nationals living in Southwark and the future of their families here. Whilst we had heard the Prime Minister's intention of what she wants to offer as part of the negotiations with the EU, nothing is guaranteed, nothing is put in place to give those people any certainty about their future here in our city or in our borough. My concern arises from my own family's history. Whilst I'm guessing that the majority of us here in this room have immigration to this country as part of that history, few of us have deportation as part of it. But that's what happened to my great-grandfather, Herman Mayer. A Jewish man born in Germany, he came over to this country with his parents as a child in the late 19th century, grew up here, worked as an engineer in the Royal Docks, married my great-grandmother and had 5 children, the youngest of which was my gran. 2 years after she was born, the First World War broke out. Despite always having lived here since childhood and having a family, he was deported as an undesirable alien purely for his place of birth back to Bremerhaven, a city he could barely remember. He was never allowed to return to the UK. My grandmother never got to see him again. And after World War II broke out, like 6 million other Jews living under the Third Reich, he was wiped off the face of history. Left in London, my great-grandmother worked every hour she could in the local soup factory to put food on the table of 5 empty mouths. That and the struggle of being a lone parent took their toll, and 100 years ago this year, she fell exhausted into a battle of boiling soup, scalding her to death. At the age of 5, my gran was effectively left an orphan to be brought up in a nascent care system by her older siblings. Of course, a century on, things are different, but given this is the 22nd anniversary of Srebrenica, perhaps we should not dismiss entirely where any instability of the EU arising from Brexit might lie. And it seems far too much of a risk to me to leave the right to remain here for people of every right to come here in the first place has been contingent on Theresa May's fabled negotiating skills. This is a woman who threw away a majority in Parliament in a bid to become strong and stable. A woman who has given away £1 billion in a deal with the DUP. We cannot run the risk of people having to leave this land, facing a choice between breaking up their families or having to take their children to a country they do not know and where they might not even be able to speak the language because such a deal does not come to pass. For them, no deal is very much worse than what some people might think is a bad deal. Those 31,000 Southwark residents deserve something better than to be treated better than a bargaining chip, whose right to stay is contingent in a weak and wobbly Theresa May getting a deal that she can sell to her most frothy-mouthed backbencher. We need to do everything we can as a council to guarantee the rights and the ability to remain to those 31,000 people and their families in this borough. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Livingston. Can I invite Councillor Lamb, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 1984, on the 70th anniversary of the start of World War I, the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and the French President Francois Mitterrand stood holding hands at the cemetery in Verdun in northern France. Symbolic of these two old enemies burying the hatchet, declaring that never again will these two Western European powers go to war. This weekend just gone, perhaps with less international significance, but with no less goodwill on both sides, I stood with my father, not holding hands, in the same part of northern France, but further west at the Vimy Ridge battlefield, and the memorial there to mark the battle that took place 100 years ago. It's impossible not to be moved by the memorials, the cemeteries, and the landscape of Flanders. And me and my dad spent a lot of time over the weekend talking about war and peace, how extremism can lead to conflict, and about the EU's emphasis on resolving major disputes through negotiation and compromise. My dad, who likes to grandly claim that he lived through World War II, he was born in 1944, is, like me, an ardent believer in the EU and its aims, and also the essential role of the UK inside that union. The importance of the EU as a peacekeeper cannot be understated. It's been supporting peace initiatives in Northern Ireland since 1995, committing €229 million to support projects that contribute towards the promotion of greater levels of peace and reconciliation. Over the past few years, it's put huge resources into confronting racism, and more recently, the worrying rise again in hate crime and anti-Semitism. The EU's foreign policy is predicated on the attainment of peace. So as well as tackling internal issues to hold off a major European military conflict, it is also encouraging and putting money towards peace processes across the world. At a time when it seems people and nations react with increasing violence and intolerance, the work the EU does with its member states and in the world is vital. My father and I, both different generations and with very different upbringings, both mourn the potential loss of the role the UK plays as part of the Union. But whatever happens, we will continue, as I'm sure all my colleagues in this room and all the people of Southwark will, to put into practice the peacekeeping values of the European Union by resolving any conflicts through negotiation, compromise, and reconciliation.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I'm nearly as old as your dad. Anyway, that's another story. Can I ask then Councillor O'Brien to come forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The two major worries coming out of the Brexit vote on the 23rd of June are the likely loss of access to the European single market and restrictions on free movement of people. Almost all people come to this country and this borough to work because work is available, which is indicative of a vibrant economy. If we restrict this free movement, it is obvious that the economy will suffer, which affects all of us. These European workers may not all be highly skilled, but they bring what skills they have. And it's alarming to note that since the Brexit vote, there has been a 96% drop in the number of EU nurses applying for British registration. The NHS isn't packed with EU patients, it's packed with EU staff and staff from other nations. Southwark residents are served by 3 major hospitals, including the largest teaching hospital in Europe. Southwark has ambitious targets for building of new homes. Almost 100,000 builders in London come from the EU. This represents 1 in 6 of all building workers in the capital. Construction of major infrastructure projects require a very large number of skilled workers. Projects like the Bakerloo Line extension and the Rotherhithe Bridge will need these people. And when they come here, they contribute in many different ways, not at least by paying their taxes. They contribute to Southwark's economy, and they make our borough a more diverse and interesting place to live. Like the rest of London, and the UK as a whole, unemployment in Southwark is on a downward path, and of course this is to be applauded. However, I'm concerned about the quality of the work that has caused this reduction in unemployment. The upsurge in Deliveroo riders and Uber drivers has given people jobs, but pay rates remain unacceptably low. Unemployment in Southwark fell by 1% between 2011 and 2014, but over the same time period, low-paid workers rose by 2%. It's not right that families struggle to make ends meet because someone wants their takeaway delivered on the tube. Yesterday, the Taylor report into the gig economy was published. It talks about one-sided flexibility, whereby low-paid workers live from hand to mouth with little opportunity for career advancement and with little chance of being able to save or contribute to a pension for later life. This is all to the benefit of some employers who seem to take an all-care, no-responsibility attitude with 0 hours contracts thrown into boot. Regardless of whether a worker is from this country or the EU, they deserve to be treated with respect, and this includes with regards to their pay and conditions. Let's strive to continue to make Southwark a destination of choice for working people.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to invite Paul Fleming, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As has been said a number of times this evening, 75% of people in this borough voted to remain in the EU. I am one of that 25%, that fabled 25% who voted to leave. And what I would say is that as I went around this borough, the things that was told to me by people that I found and identified who wished to leave were people who wanted to leave an organisation that represented a variety of values that are completely and utterly antithetical to the things that we've said this evening. An organisation which has promoted free trade and free markets, oppressed workers' terms and conditions in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, who has devastated economies through their monetary policies in Eastern Europe and replaced not fascism and communism, but rather controlled economies by the complete free market. It is an organisation which has caused immense damage and continues to do so to developing economies around the world. And what we experience now in these hard negotiations are what developing economies have been experiencing ever since the bloc got bigger and bigger and bigger. It is a bloc based purely on a European and a Eurocentric idea of identity, which I think is fundamentally narrow and fundamentally antithetical to our internationalist principles. However, the principles that people saw there are the principles that unite everybody in this room and everybody in this borough. We are indeed united to serve. And the tragic events that happened during the referendum brought to mind the phrase, "we have more in common than which divides us." And indeed that's the reason why the Labour Party's national position and this motion which supports that is fundamentally important and an absolute cornerstone of what we need to believe. It is about pushing forward for those things about the EU that we do like, those things which it has brought, those things and protections which it has, including protecting the right to remain in this country of EU nationals and the rights of those who originally come from Southwark to live abroad in Europe on the decent terms which they had the right to emigrate on in the first place. It is fundamentally important that we do that and do not get ourselves bound up with the technocratic concepts of whether we're in or out of a free market, in or out of a customs union. Putting, as our party's policy is, a jobs-first Brexit. That isn't meaningless, vacuous phrases. That is about putting together a series of options, a series of bundles and packages, and making sure that we've got the one that promotes the most growth in jobs and in terms and conditions. And that is something that we all want to see in this borough. That is what these borough's policies have all been about. And that is what the heart of this motion is all about as well. Protecting people against potential negative economic effects, which I don't think many people who voted to leave ever doubted, but also enabling and preparing ourselves for a bold new future with people working with other countries in Europe and across the world, and hopefully to form a political project, not an economic one, which is bolder and braver and not Eurocentric, favours the freedom of movement of people over the freedom of movement of labour, and is fundamentally opposed to the miserable, oppressive free market neoliberalism that has so scarred the last 40 years on this continent.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. Councillor Ambrose.
There is still so much uncertainty for the 31,000 plus EU nationals living in Southwark. Some of them have lived here for so many years, like my partner back home, who has been living in Southwark longer than I have, since 1992. Theresa May is proposing a scheme whereby EU nationals will effectively become second-class citizens. They will not have the same rights as British citizens, and these rights will be altered at any time, could be altered by any time by the British courts. The 3 million EU nationals living here will have to apply for settled status to remain. they will need to apply for an identity card with an entry on a Home Office central database. They will have a biometric ID card. When no one else here has an ID card of any sorts, then all EU nationals living here will need to have a biometric one. 150,000 EU nationals have already filled out a complete 85-page form to apply for residency. They will have to apply again from scratch for the new forms, with the new forms. The proposals mean they won't be able to bring in a spouse unless they have an income of over 18,600. This doesn't apply at the moment. There is uncertainty over healthcare, the transferability of professional qualifications, and the rights of the self-employed. If you don't apply within 2 years of the cut-off date, you will have to leave. And the icing on the cake, the current cost of settlement fees are £2,297. And if you have a dependent relative, that's £3,250. And if you want to apply for citizenship, that's a further £1,207. These costs will be prohibitive for many people, and they will be forced to leave. Yes, there are many highly paid professionals who may be able to pay this, but there are many EU nationals in this borough working in retail and other low-paid sectors, such as hospitality and social care. People will be forced to leave here, and who will fill the gaps? What will become of their families? And there's an additional thing. When I'm on the doorstep, I've quite often used my Polish, because I don't know how many of you know, but I'm half Polish, so I've used that on the doorstep. But the settled EU nationals who apply for this status, they will lose their democratic voice, because they will no longer be able to vote in local elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to invite Councillor Chanel to have a word now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is undoubtedly an issue which is of great concern to voters across the borough and clearly to all of us in this chamber. Of course, it poses a serious threat to all public services, so I welcome the chance for us to have this debate this evening. As councillors who are responsible for running a wide range of vital services for people across our borough, we should all be deeply concerned by the Prime Minister's repeated failure to commit to fight to retain British membership of the single market. We in the Liberal Democrats are all too aware that it will be hard, probably impossible, to sustain some of the strong public services if the government push ahead with their hard Brexit. If millions of jobs, the strength of the economy, and by extension tax revenues are undermined by the disastrous and short-sighted approach that Theresa May and her cabinet are taking. And while there is perhaps relatively little that we can do to directly change that in this chamber this evening, I hope that Labour members of the Council can at least be persuaded to lobby their own party leadership to join with our party in Westminster in applying pressure on this issue. Many people who supported Labour at the recent election, including many in the strongly Remain borough of Southwark, will have been appalled to see the Leader of the Opposition firing people from his shadow cabinet a couple of weeks ago because they voted with a cross-party group of MPs in favour of retaining British membership of the single market. I hope that this is not a position that Southwark Labour would endorse, and that they are prepared, both in the way that they vote tonight and in ongoing communication with their colleagues in Westminster, to lobby for a change in this position. They are currently only serving to support the Prime Minister and her cabinet, which is hardly the job of the real opposition. And it isn't just about doing what's right to represent your constituents who voted Remain and who certainly didn't vote for a Brexit which will leave the economy weaker or people worse off. This is also about fighting for a Brexit which will do the least damage to public services which we are responsible for overseeing and that all of our residents depend on. Of course, the dangers of a hard Brexit go further than purely financial concerns. Take the NHS and social care. The damage which is threatened to staffing of these services, which are already under incredible pressure, is already starting to become clear. We are absolutely reliant on the huge numbers of dedicated staff in our NHS and social care services who have moved from elsewhere in the EU to live and work in the UK. 10% of doctors, 7% of nurses and 10% of social care staff are from elsewhere in the EU. And yet the Prime Minister, again, is still effectively refusing to guarantee that they will have the right to remain living and working here. This is obviously a totally unacceptable position to put these people in. But can you also imagine the damage which will be done to NHS and care services if they lose this many experienced and hard-working staff? The Liberal Democrats' position is that we should immediately guarantee these people the right to remain in the UK and to continue making this deeply valued contribution to our community. And I hope that that is something that everyone in this chamber is united in fighting for. And in the interest of the residents of our borough, we all have a duty to bring to bear the influence we have on our colleagues in Westminster to join us in fighting the disastrous prospect of a hard Brexit. Otherwise, public services, which all our residents depend on, and our borough, will pay the price.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Flynn, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations on your appointment as our first citizen and certainly our most entertaining. I am an extreme Remainer, a Ramona, a Brexit denier. I would be happy to overturn the referendum result, to have a second referendum, or for Southwark to secede from the UK and remain a small but proud member of the EU. Although living as I do on their border, I have my concerns about what this would mean for access to Lambeth, or as I call it, going out to get milk. So I've worked on dozens of elections and have lost more than I can count, but none came close to the feeling in the early hours of June the 24th last year. I woke up feeling as if I didn't belong here, that I lived in a country that I did not recognise and did not want to be part of. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like to a foreign national living in Southwark who had made this their home. Now we're told by some Brexiteers not to talk Britain down, that we're not patriotic. But it wouldn't be patriotic to go along with the delusion that everything will be okay. There are no benefits to our borough from Brexit. Now, I've got a tie with me, given to me last week by my friend, who's the Minister for European Funding in Malta, to mark the presidency of the EU in that country. Now, I promised him that I'd wear it in this debate to remind me of the sheer disbelief in this country at our self-destructive decision. But even economic catastrophe is not enough to persuade me to wear a tie, so it remains in the box. Now, Amendment E talks of the benefits of the single market, basically access to the single market without membership. Now, personally, I don't believe this to be possible, and I favour full membership. But I believe that we should at least try and exhaust the option to avoid accusations from the hard Brexit brigade. And in that spirit, and without a ticket, I'll be demanding full access to the Oval for England v South Africa on the 27th of July. I'll let you know how I get on. So I support Amendment E, but with the heavy heart of someone who believes that Brexit in any form will be a disaster for our great borough.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Can I invite Yasmin Ali, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to talk about the freedom of movement and rights of EU citizens. My little family are all children of immigrants. I am, my partner is, my kids are. We've benefited from freedom of movement, and I hope my children will benefit from it in future too, by being able to travel across borders, Europe at will, just as I did when I was a younger person, teenager. But now it's at risk because of the Brexit decision, and because of Tory incompetence and cruelty. Let's look at the impact here in Southwark. In our borough, there are an estimated 26,000 citizens born in EU countries other than the UK. These people don't know if they're going to be able to stay in the UK after Brexit. Hospitals don't know if their staff will be allowed to stay. Our schools don't know if their children will be allowed to stay. Now, Theresa May has refused to guarantee them rights to stay. 3 million people will be forced to reapply for the right to stay. They have already completed an 80-page EU form. Now they'll have to complete another one. And who's going to process these millions of applications? Then it gets really complicated. If they've been here for 5 years by the time of the new cut-off point, which hasn't even been fixed yet, they may be okay. If not, or if they don't apply properly, or if they arrive after the cut-off point, there will be a separate procedure. Clear, isn't it? Gives certainty, doesn't it? Does it help? There are 3 million EU citizens in Britain. Presumably some won't meet these deliberately complicated criteria. So in 2 years' time, when we're trying to negotiate a trade deal with the EU, the same time we'll be herding 50,000 Germans, French, Italian, Spanish and Polish citizens onto the planes for deportation. Obviously, the Tories couldn't care less about trade or business. They just want to stop people coming in. And this cruel policy reads more like the Home Office, not number 10. Well, we won't let this happen. A popular Labour government probably very soon will simply guarantee their rights. And with the Tories in deep crisis, people's eyes are starting to open to all of this. And I wonder if this rotten Brexit will ever happen. Because I hope not. Because I don't want to see our trade strangled. I don't want to see people deported. And I want my children's future to be an open road, not one which is crisscrossed with barbed wire.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I invite Councillor Mann, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations on being elected as the first citizen of the borough. And I'm very pleased to have a chance to speak in support of the Liberal Democrat amendment to the themed motion on what Brexit means for Southwark. As a former nurse and as someone who moved from abroad to be trained and work for the NHS in Southwark, I would like to talk about what Brexit means for health and social care in our borough. We are lucky in Southwark to have 3 world-class hospitals providing care for our residents. Guy's just down the road at London Bridge, St Thomas's Hospital by Westminster Bridge, and King's on our doorstep in Denmark Hill. These hospitals benefit hugely from our membership of the single market, which means that doctors, nurses and allied health professionals from across the EU are free to come and work in the NHS in our borough. In South London, 10.8% of NHS staff are from the EU. That is 13% of all doctors and nearly 2,500 nurses who come from EU countries. The NHS is experiencing a staffing crisis, a crisis which is being made worse by the record number of EU nationals leaving the NHS following the vote for Brexit. Analysis shows an 83% rise in doctors from the 27 other EU states leaving the NHS in the months following the referendum compared to with the same period in 2015. There has also been a slowdown in EU nationals joining the NHS since the referendum. Figures from the Nursing and Midwifery Council from December 2016 show more than a 90% drop in the number of nurses from EU states registering to join. And what about social care? EU nationals make up 13% of the adult social care workforce in London and 80% of new entrants to the profession. Research by Independent Age shows that we could be looking at a shortfall of 750,000 workers by 2037 if immigration controls limit people coming to the UK to work in social care. This is why calling simply for the clarification of the rights of EU nationals who are already here, although important, is not enough. The Liberal Democrat amendment to the motion calls for the solution we need, one that means that EU and EEA nationals can continue to come and work in the health and social care system in Southwark, where they are so desperately needed. 73% of Southwark residents who voted in the referendum voted to remain in the EU. We owe it to these residents who we are elected to represent. To do everything we can to make sure that the health and social care system in Southwark, which relies so much to EU nationals, is not broken by Brexit. I therefore call upon my Labour colleagues to put tribalism aside and speak up for the people of Southwark in supporting the Liberal Democrat amendment to the themed motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. We come to our last speaker. I apologise for those who wanted to speak, but our time is up really. So can I invite Councillor Vicky Mills, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 64% of young people aged 18 to 24 voted Remain. They are going to have to live with the decision to leave the EU on average for 69 years. 33% of voters aged 65 plus voted Remain. They will have to live with the decision to leave for only 16 years. The conclusions of the June the 8th general election, one of the conclusions is that we are becoming more and more polarised by age. Over the course of 7 years, the partisan age gap has rocketed from 14 points to 83 points. Pollsters are clear that there's a strong link between young people and voting Labour, but they were even clearer that from June the 8th there was an incredibly strong relationship between Labour, young voters and Remain. As Labour councillors, we've been given a huge challenge to meet the expectations of young people who want to remain in the EU. We've heard a lot about those people who voted Leave feeling disenfranchised. However, I think it's time to ensure we recognise how younger people feel increasingly disenfranchised by their falling incomes, their job insecurity, their growing student debt, the poor quality and expensive rented homes that they live in, and the diminishing chance of owning their own home, as well as the decision to leave the EU. I really welcome the sentiments we express in the motion, our ambitions for jobs, apprenticeships, a strong economy, our ambition for a diverse and culturally rich borough. But I am, however, an unashamed Ramona. On the morning after the referendum result, I spotted my children's burgundy passports on the shelf, and I felt ashamed that one day they would leaf through those in the way that I leafed through my parents' navy ones, and I would have to explain to them that we were once part of a social and economic union that embraced our neighbours and tried to work together to find solutions and compromise on common problems. I will vote for the motion tonight and for Amendment E, but I think we need to be more than words on a piece of paper, and that we need to step up and we need to work with a generation of young people who are determined that we remain a progressive and outward-looking country.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. May I say, I think we've had some tremendous contributions tonight from all sides. Thank you very much. Shows what a good council we are. Can I there invite Councillor, the leader of the council, Peter John, to sum up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bell. I'll be quite brief. And I was thinking exactly the same thing, actually. Commend members on this debate. I think it has been a really strong debate with contributions from across the piece, and I think demonstrates a very thoughtful approach, which we would expect, of course, in the best council, in the best borough, in the best city, in the best country in the world. We've touched on things from rights of EU citizens through to construction. We know that construction has been hit. A particularly large volume house builder has already told us that many thousands of EU employees have gone back, within the last few months, gone back to their homes in Poland or wherever else in Eastern Europe and not coming back. That's because of the uncertainty, it's because of the drop in the value of the pound. We've not mentioned that this evening, but the pound plummeted, don't forget, after Brexit and has not recovered, and therefore the financial advantage of working in Britain is not there. And that's important, of course, as one member spoke about, the major construction that we have got going in our borough, the major aspirations we have for construction in our borough and across London. But one thing that particularly struck me, Mr. Mayor, was that we could have had this very self-same debate a year ago. And why do I say that? Because the government has so magnificently failed to set out a route plan with any clarity, really indicate what this is about and what Brexit will mean. Brexit means Brexit, as somebody said, completely vacuous, meaningless statement which the Prime Minister seems to think is a policy. It's not. It's a vacuous statement. And of course she was found out on June the 8th for that very same reason. The government has got to get its act together. This country cannot live in perpetual uncertainty and economic uncertainty and political uncertainty for the next 21 months. That is simply untenable. But I have absolutely no faith that this government will do it. What I do know, and what I'm really pleased by, Mr. Mayor, is that this council this evening will restate the values which we believe in and which, as I said earlier on, make Southwark Southwark.
Thank you. So now we will vote on Amendment E. Those in favour of Amendment E? Those against?
11, Mr. Mayor.
11. Any abstentions? Therefore, Amendment E is carried. In that case, we move to the substantive, don't we? Amendment A? We don't?
Amendment A.
A, yeah. All those in favour of Amendment A? Make your minds up, yes? Yeah. Yes? Anyone's against?
44.
Abstentions?
11 abstentions.
Okay. Amendment A is carried. Thank you very much for that. We'll vote on the substantive, of course. All those in favour of the substantive, please show. All those against? 44-4. And against? Any abstentions? 11 abstentions. So the substantive is carried. Thank you very much. Good. Right. Great. Thank you. Now we move on.